My name is Ron Daniels. I'm president of the Institute of the Blackwell 21st Century, and we are delighted to have you here for this amazing gathering. The first thing I want to do before doing anything is to have us reflect on the loss of a legend. As we speak, the body and the remains of Kenneth Gibson, the first African American mayor of a major northeastern city, lies in state in the rotunda of City Hall. And we are called to reflect and remember the tremendous legacy of someone who came out of an era of rebellion and struggle and took on the task of running the city. For 4 terms, I think it was, that he ran the city. Not without controversy. There always, when you're a mayor, there are going to be controversies and tensions and so forth. But he was a first. And so we remember him for that. We're running a little bit late because the mayor is deeply involved in that remembrance and that process. He will actually be memorialized and funeralized this evening. But there are literally hundreds of people who are going through the rotunda, and the mayor and his cabinet, including a gentleman who will be speaking to you soon, was involved in having to be there. The second thing I want to have us reflect on for a moment is that this is the 51st anniversary of the martyrdom of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And indeed, last year we gathered on the 50th anniversary, but it is always important to remember that it was on this day, 51 years ago, that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who was on a mission in Memphis that had everything to do with the questions that we're dealing with today, economic justice, both in terms of the internal organization of the black community, as well as dealing with the respect for sanitation workers and workers, but also as a predicate for launching the Poor People's Campaign, which was about dealing with economic justice for not only black people, but people of all races and ethnicities across this country. So I just wanted to begin there with a sense of our remembrance of these 2 giants. And in the African tradition, you are allowed to say Ashe. Ashe. And so it ordered. I want to first of all quickly thank Mayor Baraka and Carmelo Garcia, who's here, for convening us. We'd like to move right ahead and invite to bring greetings on behalf of the mayor and the city, a brother beloved that we have come to respect for his incredible vision, his courage, and his indefatigable spirit, because he keeps pounding and pounding and pounding in relationship to making sure that Newark is on the map, in relationship to community development, its progressive policies, and he has worked with us very closely in terms of making, in fact, this would not have happened without his cooperation. He is now joined to the hip with the Institute of the Blackwell 21st Century in terms of the long-term work that we're doing. Would you please welcome to the podium the Honorable Carmelo Garcia.
Wow, I gotta tell you, this is amazing. I'm so blessed to have great company, legends in this room, joining us here in the great city of Newark. Newark welcomes you with open arms and a deep heart for trying to help our amazing mayor, Ras J. Baraka, in this movement and initiative to ensure that Newark have the best, if not one of the best, national models as it's experiencing this amazing, transformative state that is God sent, because to whom much is given, much is required. And so to Dr. Daniels, who I thought I was Superman, but this brother, he just took the cake. Big round of applause to Dr. Daniels. He is like the Avengers all in one. And we are so proud of the partnership with the Institute of a Black World because we recognize how much it's needed to preserve and create opportunities for the generation of wealth as we continue to move on our E3 model where equitable growth is everything, and where the mayor recognizes and has championed a platform of policies to ensure that we, as a city, but globally, as here interconnectedly, produce policies and real practical experiences of how to preserve and create wealth for a city that is predominantly Black. And that is what it's all about. Giving back to the African American community, making sure that the Black and brown agenda of what once was takes new light, new flight to greater opportunities, and that everyone recognizes that Newark is not going to be ashamed, nor is it going to be reserved in its position of pushing an agenda that is Black-driven, brown-driven, minority-driven. And that's why I love this mayor, because at the end of the day, he entrusts in us and respects our expertise and the authority he gives us to go out and be a part of something sensational like this. This is historic. Because when Dr. Daniels said, we need to do something that's going to address the ongoing potential of the new Negro removal program hidden within gentrification of cities. Cities that on the backs of those individuals that have made it what it is today can continue to thrive and not leave its people behind. So for me, I've always been an activist and an advocate, and I'd like to give a shout out to Miss Hill, Dr. Hill over there, because she knows me from Seton Hall University, where I was the president of Adelante organization, and we were leading the movement with Micheline Davis, who is now the second number 2 at RWJ as president of the council, the first African-American woman to be president of the student council on the campus of Seton Hall. And we were leading protests, not to give my age, but definitely that goes back now, Ms. Hill, 18 years ago. And we were successful in having breakthroughs. And when the mayor brought me here to the great city of Newark, he knew that I would champion and carry out his vision, a progressive vision, one that would unite our people, would galvanize them to have a seat at the table, if not, as we always say, like the amazing Congresswoman Chisholm said, right? If they don't give you a seat at the table, you bring one. A folding chair. You bring a folding chair to that table. And the reality is, we don't have to worry about that, because with the brain power in here and with this amazing convening that Dr. Daniels has been able to really put all his heart, breath, blood, and soul into this. And I've seen it around the clock. They used to say that I was the winner of a kicking contest, a one-man, legged kick contest. He has that title now, because let me tell you, this man's been around the clock like a one-man army, but always recognizing his team. And for all of you that don't realize what happens behind the scenes to put this together, man, it's a lot of work, and we're blessed. Newark is blessed to have you. Mayor Baraka wants you to know that he deeply, deeply loves you for coming here to this convening and participating in offering us some amazing brain power, some best practices, the ability to truly rise above everything else and make Newark a city we can all believe in. And I got to shout out Frederica Bay, the honorable queen over there that I like to, who does great work in our community, a pioneer. And all of you, Johnny Ford, Jesus, Lord knows, wow, what an iconic force, a pioneer. Mayor, you have been a true champion. I read about you kind of growing up, and I'm still trying to keep my age as young, but the reality is that I've been in this 20 years. And I'm going to tell you that the mayor knows What we're about to do is game-changing, groundbreaking. What Newark wants to represent to the world is that we are not afraid. We want to be the model. We want to recognize that we, under the community wealth building model, can generate wealth for our people, can make sure that our people are stakeholders in owning real estate, earning more money, making more entrepreneurs, millionaires that are of color, that are black and brown. So I say to all of you, God bless you. Thank you. With Godspeed, congratulations for your historic participation. Love you.
He's the great salesman, the great salesman. Give it up for Carmelo Garcia again. All right. Okay, now I'd like to welcome to the rostrum the chairperson of the Board of Directors, the Institute of the Blackwell 21st Century, hails out of Pittsburgh, where I spent a little time too. I came up in August Wilson's Hill District, so we also have a connection. Would you please welcome Rick Adams?
Brother President got me scared. Dr. Daniels, he is a taskmaster. I know we're here to work. I want to say, as he has already said, I hail from Pittsburgh. Literally, I was trying to figure out how that works in. Left a few kidney stones on my way here. So I've been having an interesting week, but I'm here. I didn't get to D.C. last week. But what I do want to say is it is always a pleasure to come here to Newark. And over the years, I've been here for many different activities and things, including I was reminiscing with my partners. We drove up that a good friend of mine, I have to call him, got married in the Spirit House here. And of course, many different things, including a couple of years ago, the State of the Black World Conference was held. And I guess it's coming about that time to come back. But we were treated well. Newark has always been a beacon for where our people ought to be, a North Star, if you will. And part of the Institute of the Black World's vision and modus operandi is that we pull together the many threads, the many tendencies, if you will, of our people, being the first people. Sometimes we get upset about diversity and we're not all on the same page, but being the first people, think about that a minute. Everything on the planet of humanity comes from us, so why wouldn't we be diverse? That's a strength. We just got to master that. And if we can keep some folks from interfering with us and let us build our own institutions, fund our own institutions, celebrate our own holidays and gods, and support our leaders, he and she, and the entire breadth of the family. I've been learning a lot. I think, Ron, we went to a gathering where the young people are really teaching some of us OGs some new stuff. And I reminisce in the 60s, some of that, if I'd walked in the room, I would have got thrown out. But it's progress. And so we're going to make progress here today. And I just want to give thanks to Mayor Baraka and all of the community activists and good people of this city and all of you all who have traveled here. Let's get to work. And I'm short, Brother President.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Rick Adams. And by the way, Mayor Baraka will be here. Now, you will see he'll be here. So he just couldn't be here today. There's a roundtable tomorrow. He'll be for that and the town hall meeting. So he will be here. So don't you'll get a chance. What I'm going to do quickly is just say a few words before we bring on our two presenters. And the way we're going to work this, rather than disrupt it now and have you rush the table, we're going to go through our program. There is a little break before the next session starts anyway. That's a more logical flow. And, you know, you can exercise some like fasting for a moment, you know what I mean? A little light fast, a little exercise fast, you know, a little fake fast. And then you can like destroy the food afterwards, okay? So that makes more sense because if we break the flow now, we're in a groove now, right? We're rolling. So we don't want to break the flow now. I just want to go through a quick few points before we bring on two people who are going to set the table for us. And I first of all just want to quickly say that it's important to contextualize this gathering because as you look at your program this morning, some of you saw a closed session. Somebody said, what is that closed session about? Well, the closed session was because this is not the first session. this is a part of an extended process that the Institute of the Blackwell 21st Century is engaged in that really focuses on Newark. Not Newark because of the personality of Ras J. Baraka and so forth, but because there's a history here of rebellion that some of you know about. There's a history of white supremacy and suppression, but there's also a history of struggle in this city. And there is in this city a mayor, and there are others around the country, but certainly who is working hard to be at the forefront of advancing cutting-edge policies in terms of how to deal with questions of equity and inclusion and wealth building. Doesn't mean that it's perfect, doesn't mean that it's all succeeding, but at least one of the things that's important is to have the will. First of all, the vision, and then the will. And then if you can couple that with the skill and the experience, then we have an opportunity. So at this time last year, quickly, we were gathered here again, a smaller group, and we were dealing with two questions. One was the notion that Mayor Baraka supports, and I support, and others support, of an idea of a Marshall Plan. That is to say that for time immemorial, beginning with the Urban League's Whitney Young, there has been the notion that why can't Black America, that has suffered so deeply, particularly in the urban areas, not be nourished with investment in the same way that Europe was rebuilt after the Second World War? And of course, it's like a pie in the sky notion, and it never really happened, but it kept being put on the table in different iterations and so forth. Well, if that was as irrelevant in the era of Whitney Young, after massive deindustrialization that many of your cities have experienced and massive disinvestment, I mean, tremendous disinvestment, and also blatant neglect, then it's more urgent as ever that there be an infusion of resources in our communities to help heal them, to revitalize them, if you will. And so we met about that, and we met about it in two ways. Number one, to talk about how do we do Marshall Plan type ideas given existing resources. And then secondly, we talked about launching a national movement to, in fact, galvanize Black people across this country to push for this idea anew. The other thing that we talked about was, if we have Black folks across this country who have means and resources, we're not the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, or even some of these recent, millionaires and billionaires and so forth and so on, but it's not as if we don't have resources. We got about $1.2 trillion worth of retail consumer power. And, we got some folks getting max contracts and supermax contracts and, half a billionaires and all this kind of stuff. We're saying, why can't some of those resources be focused on rebuilding Black communities across this country? And why not, in fact, find the people who were from Newark and do that here in Newark, but also anybody from around the country to do that? So we focused on that as well. And what we came up with was an idea, a plan for how to supplement and complement what is happening here in Newark in terms of some of the areas that they may need some help. But also, we brought to the table specific people who have ideas who could, in fact, be engaged with helping, particularly with the model neighborhood initiative they have, because there's a section in Newark, the West Ward and the Central Ward, which really, really needs serious investment. And so our meeting this morning was about reconnecting the dots around that and figuring out how we move forward. And what we included, if you take your booklet out, you'll see near the end of the book, you'll see something called an action agenda. So that when you get an opportunity, you should review that. I think it's in here. Let me just make sure it's here. There should be, it's on page 12 and 13 in your book. It's called the Preliminary Action Agenda. So you can just read that, right? And you'll see what it is that we came up with. But the point is to understand that this meeting is connected to the meeting last year. You are a part of a process. In the interim, what happened was that, as many of you observed, and I travel around the country and sort of see what's going on and what's happening, and we observed that there are a couple of issues that really gnaw at the heart and soul of Black America. One of them is the internal murders, the fratricide and violence. The new mayor of Chicago, if you heard the interviews with her, she focused on that. The murder rate is down, but it's just too many people in our communities who are turning on each other and who are violating each other. And there are reasons why that occurs, but nonetheless, the senseless violence, this whole thing that just happened with Nipsey Hussle, it's like, come on, I mean, it's like crazy, right? And that hurts black people. It's another wound in the intergenerational wounds that we've suffered. But the other issue is you go around the country and you have a conversation talking about where we are, and within 2 or 3 minutes, people talk about what? White folks taking over everything. Our communities, I read about Durham. Where's Durham? Where's Durham? I read about y'all. Article in the paper said it just don't feel like Durham no more. The community just don't feel like our communities anymore because they're displacing black people. Seattle, Washington, the central business district used to be a black business district. Displaced, those people are now out in Tacoma and scattered other places. That's what really Ferguson is. Ferguson is the result of the displacement of black people from the central part of St. Louis. And it's not new, by the way. This is the most recent iteration. That's why we call it the Negro removal, because in my day, Negro removal was urban renewal. So some of y'all, next generation may not recall, but in our generation, it was urban renewal that was going through communities, highways, and just going straight through, busting up our communities. And so you can't be within a community, within a few minutes, people are talking about gentrification. You say to folks, the first thing you see is they be walking the dogs. Not that we don't have dogs. And, next thing you see is the Whole Foods store right behind that as a symbol of what's happening in our communities, displacing people and culture. In Harlem, for years and years and years, on Saturday, brothers and sisters come together to do a drumming tradition. They just out there in Marcus Garvey Park, and it's a part of the community. Noisy, yeah, but it's our noise. We kind of like our noise. It was cool. Nobody was complaining about it, right? Until some other people moved in, and all of a sudden, oh, no, we must not have that. And then displacing black culture, right? And so we decided that this is an emergency. So even though we in the Institute of Blackwell 21st Century have virtually no resources, and I say in my appeal here, we called on this on guts and face, because God knows we didn't have no money. We said we must have a national emergency summit on gentrification because it is an emergency, what's happening in our communities. And we reached out to you, and I am it's been hard work. But the thing I like about the hard work is I got to meet and talk to a lot of y'all on the phone. We found you, and we have to give special thanks to a number of you, but we also got to give special thanks to Dr. Jeffrey Lowe right here, this brother right here. Right? Because I called him and I said, there's a partner of ours who could not be here, Dr. Ntangalizi Sanyika, one of the most brilliant minds we have in Black America in terms of community economic development. He was here the first time, couldn't be here this time. He said, but connect with Dr. Jeffrey Lowe. He has a neural connection, he'll help. I called a brother. He didn't hesitate. He didn't give me that scholarly academic, well, brother, what do you like? He said, what do we need? And he wrote it. He just gave me names. So I know Derek Hall. I know Dr. Harris. I know a number of people around this table, Sister Asada. I know you because this brother knew you and recommended you. And that's how you came to this table. And so we're here to grapple with these questions. And one of the things I want to just sort of stress is we're going to do a couple of presentations now, but as I say in the guidelines, this is not really a presentation kind of thing because people wanted to come with their resumes. And then I said, no, this is a conversation. We're going to be talking to each other. And among those things that I want you to pay attention to is 3 things. One is the narrative. What is happening in our communities? What does gentrification look like in Houston, Texas? What does it look like, Brother Mike, in Baltimore? See? What does it look like in Detroit? What does it look like, Brother Kamal, in Atlanta? What is it? What's the narrative of what's happening in our communities? And what are the causative factors? And then finally, we're going to be focusing on what can we do about it. And the most important thing that we do in the Institute of the Blackwell 21st Century, which I am so proud of, is we focus on what I call creating a culture of collaboration, a culture of collaboration. See, culture is something that's in your bones. We don't often collaborate. We be in the same city and don't talk to each other. Creating a culture of collaboration to heal and empower Black families, communities, and nations. The premise is we are our best teachers. You see what I'm saying? Everybody in this room is a resource person who brings something to the table. And it's the point is we will share with each other. We may have some disagreements, and that's fine, but within a respectful way, because out of that creative tension and conversations, we are going to find some solutions. We are going to build a resource center, we hope. We're going to get your input on that. And the main thing is we hope to continue. This is not the end. We hope to find the resources to make sure a luta continua, that we are able to continue this process. I'm going to close on another couple of quick notes. One, those dots are very important because we just got quick introductions here right now, but this afternoon, and if I really knew how big this room is, we could have got everybody in here, but it's already foreordained now. But there will be 4 groups, probably about 20 people in each group. We'll point out who your facilitators are. So when you come back from dinner, we'll reemphasize that. We need you to come back expeditiously because in those groups, you'll get a chance to get to know each other better, right? Because it's about knowing each other. It's about relationships. It's about networking. And we're going to get a chance to do that in those sessions. So I just want to stress that point in terms of the importance of that networking and that sharing. And the final thing is I'm going to say to you is you'll see an appeal. In the back of this book, you'll see an appeal, right? And in your bag, there's an envelope too. Tell no lies, claim no easy victories. This was guts and faith. And we want you to contribute if you can. So at the end of the process, when you read the appeal, if you like what you see, we're going to ask for your criticisms and your suggestions. But if you can, we're going to ask you to contribute. We got an envelope there. And we'll also find ways and means that if you can't do it here, you can go online. Because we got to find out how we can move this process forward. And by the way, there are organizations here who can also help that process move forward. And we're also looking for those of you who have connections in the foundation world. This work needs to be funded. Gentrification is one of the top priorities in Black America. We need to be knocking on the door saying this kind of process and the organizations doing this work in the community need to be funded. Okay, so now, and that in the spirit of Harambe, right? Harambe, all pulled together. Ujima, collective work and responsibility. Ujamaa, cooperative economics, all those good things. So now what we want to do is paint a picture for you of what gentrification looks like from the perspective of, again, a brother who stepped up big time to aid and assist this process. And I'm profoundly thankful to him because, I came out of the era in which we created Black Studies programs. We fought to get Black people in the academy. And the first wave was vigorous and visionary, but after a while it became much more academic, became much more about just the papers and Dr. Harris and I were having a conversation the other day about this, he said it's about, getting tenure, and that's great, we need that. But we asked people to go to that academy because we wanted to create a link between the academy and the community, and we also wanted people to use their talent, their skill, and put it at the behest of our people. That's what that struggle was about in terms of Black Studies programs, but also even campuses and even traditionally Black colleges. And so in that spirit, this brother comes, and is going to lay out for us his sense of where we are and in his own way. And that is Dr. Jeffrey Lowe. And I'm looking for his introduction here because I ain't giving long lines, but I at least want to give him his due as the Associate Professor, Department of Urban Planning and Environmental Policy, and there's some more that goes with it too. We couldn't add all of that. Southern University in Houston, Texas. Dr. Lowe, you're on. Give it a big round of applause to Dr. Jeffrey Lowe.
Good afternoon. I too want to take a moment to thank Dr. Daniels for convening this emergency summit, as well as Mayor Baraka for hosting, and the city of Newark for hosting us today. And I know that we're fasting and preparing for lunch, so I really want to move through my presentation here. But I will say that any overview of gentrification must begin with contextualization of particular times and political economic events in order to fully appreciate the impact that gentrification is having on Black communities, on our communities, and really, while we're here, thinking about alternatives to it. Now, gentrification, and while gentrification may be a relatively new phenomenon, what is not new to our communities and grounded in white supremacy and racism and greed is a history, a continuation of displacement. That's not new. We can call a few examples even in this region, examples that go further, if you will, beyond Seneca Village that was displaced to make way for Central Park in New York City. Here in the great state of New Jersey, we have to talk about Black people in Mount Laurel, many of whom were descendants of free people and people who escaped from slavery, going back to the 1700s, who were displaced in the 1960s, and the only place for them to go, many of them being chicken farmers, the only place for them to go was into the lowest of income areas in Camden. So we have to recognize that displacement certainly isn't new. IBW member Manning Marable explained to us in his book, appropriately entitled, How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America, the Root of the Problem. The basis for gentrification that wreaks havoc on the Black community in the US is a crisis of capital. And the way they have chosen out of that crisis is massive financialization of housing and land. The crisis was upon us in the 1970s with the deindustrialization, economic restructuring, and disinvestment of public resources that took hold. Industries of mass production that once employed thousands of low-skilled workers on assembly lines, shipbuilding, etc., while also offering salaries at levels supporting mass consumption of low-cost goods, now cease to exist. Unemployment and inflation during that period rose sharply, while growth, productivity, and real wages stagnated. And this had a particularly negative effect on the Black community. William Julius Wilson, in When Work Disappears, made note of this particular vulnerability of our communities to structural economic changes, such as the shift of goods producing to service producing industries, the increasing polarization of the labor market into high wage and low wage sectors, technological innovations, and the relocation of manufacturing out of central cities. Simply put, processes of capital accumulation not only began to come to a halt, but there were very few spaces found to be profitable where reinvestment, absorption of capital surpluses could take place. Hence, urbanization was chosen as the solution. Urbanization absorbs large amounts of surplus capital. And by restructuring expansion, it also allows speculation to take place. So it's not just about the absorption, it's about the speculation. Historically, the construction of the city as a solution to the problem of how to invest surplus capital is not new. Again, just looking at this region, we can talk about Robert Moses and the urbanization of the New York City region. What is different today is that production of the city has turned into the primary solution of the spatial capitalist crisis. And it is eminently financial and has very little, I argue, if any, thing to do with quality of life concerns in poor and indigenous working class Black communities. Now, we can talk about this over the summit and feel free to disagree with me, but this has not always been the case. The Housing Act of 1937 called for the elimination of slums and unsanitary housing conditions and created public housing authorities. Shortly thereafter, the Housing Act of 1949, which did launch, by the way, urban renewal, set goals. It set goals. The goals were set that 810,000 units of affordable housing would be built over a period of 6 years. So that total by 1955 would have been 16 million units of affordable and public housing nationwide. It took actually 23 years to realize 110,000 units of public housing. But what is important to note here is that our public policy initially had the right intention. It was initially focused on a social concept, increasing the public housing and affordable housing stock. It was subsequently co-opted and became an economic concept for urban redevelopment. Thus, 20 years later, twice the amount of housing stock was destroyed than built. Urban renewal became known as Negro removal. And if an area was redeveloped, it was more likely not to be low income and super segregated. In many places, these areas became redeveloped for commercial and administrative use. For example, in Atlanta, Black communities were raised and redeveloped into downtown retail, hospitality, entertainment, and the government complex. At the same time, the super segregation furthered racialization of urban space by allowing the movement of ethnic Europeans to move to newly built suburbs. Actually, it was during this period that we really saw the consolidation of whiteness. While Black mobility options were primarily restricted to the inner city, primarily to newly built public housing and housing formerly occupied by whites fleeing to the suburbs. It's the process that we know today as redlining and blockbusting. Between 1933 and 1962, the federal government underwrote $120 billion in new housing. Less than 2% went to Blacks and other people of color. So, rather than focusing on quality of life concerns for Black communities, what becomes the priority in the city's role and is the position in the global urban hierarchy, which is defined by economic competitiveness via the absorption and the maximum expansion of capital. Even President Carter's commission on a national agenda for the 80s concluded developing a national policy for community revitalization was ill-advised because it would conflict with the overarching goal of national economic competitiveness. This belief that the sole purpose of the city is for the economic is undergirded by neoliberalism, an ideology that advocates private property, the privatization of social resources, the flexibility or loosening up of regulatory frameworks that might hinder free market values, and the withdrawal of state intervention in meeting social needs. Essentially, neoliberalism is enhancing the economic for the already well-to-do. It maximizes capital accumulation through privatization, including privatizing certain functions once under the auspices of the state. Furthermore, it should be noted that beyond the US, it is the political economic structure accompanying globalization processes throughout the world. To be clear, neoliberalism has become the dominant thinking in most parts of the world. This desire for the world to invest their surplus capital in the production of the city in order to maximize their profit, greed, is most visible through financialization. In particular, the financialization of housing, whereby the private market and associated financial institutions and financial elites gain greater influence over economic policy and economic outcomes. It has become the key variable in their expansion of capital accumulation. There have been at least two significant epochs in our neoliberal turn that have fueled the gentrification that we experience in our Black neighborhoods. The first, I argue, is state retrenchment, the dismantling of working class gains. For example, the 1980s election of Ronald Reagan, a decade or more of Reaganomics, or trickle-down economics. I think most of us in this room probably remember that, where responsibilities once carried out by the federal government were turned over to the private sector, the market. Correspondingly, government at all levels began to shrink from responsibility of progress and gains achieved during the mid-20th century civil rights movement. This reduction in the role of the state, along with the dismantling of many of the gains made by Black and other people and working class groups, signaled quite visibly the emergence of neoliberalism. The second thing that has contributed to gentrification have been new forms of governance where the state ensures free market circulation. Public policies were created aimed at promoting the expansion of urban real estate markets. It is here where we experience gentrification taking hold with intention. Over the past 3 decades, we can see how gentrification processes have occurred within Black communities across the US. Local governments carry out, for example, boosterism, which consists of the promotion of the community and the city as a result, with the aim of improving its social perception and to revalue land prices. Examples of this could be the promotion of bus tours of white tourists in Black churches and restaurants on Sundays. Also, rebranding. A portion of the Eckington neighborhood, for example, in DC, has been rebranded NOMA, North of Massachusetts Avenue. In 2017, developers and real estate agents, gentrifiers of course, wanted to rename Harlem between 110 and 125th Street Soha. Harlem resisted. Makes me proud to say I'm a native New Yorker from the village of Harlem. And our congressperson, Adriana Espinat, planned to introduce a House resolution, literally an act of Congress, right, to declare the protection of the name Harlem for the entire community. Now, I don't know whether that happened or not, but I certainly know that the Amsterdam News reported that was what was supposed to happen. All right. Within the interurban international competitive context, cities apply urban marketing strategies in order to attract investors. Hence, the implementation of growth at any price policies subordinates social justice and environmental concerns. Again, municipal public services have been progressively privatized, and urban planning has become subordinated to market imperatives. The winners in this scenario are typically the landowner class, the financial sector, and the real estate developers. In the main, the Black community loses. Within this political process, urban elites and private agents play a key role in the decision-making process. Cities are run in business style with entrepreneurial discourses, and urban policies are addressing or moving towards capital interest instead of the fulfillment of citizen needs. Public administrators seek the collaboration of the private sector to manage the city. We know them. Public-private partnerships, which often result in the privatization of public means and resources, and at a minimum, the private sector playing an active role in the decision-making process. Put another way, cities adopt an entrepreneurial strategy in order to succeed in an increasingly global economy. In turn, this strategy has entailed the detriment of the redistributive approach that was gaining some traction before the establishment of the neoliberal hegemony. Perhaps what is most important to recognize is that the state at all levels, local, regional, and national, takes an active role as promoter of gentrification. Furthermore, municipal administrators over the last 3 decades have been redesigned to function as major agents in sustaining gentrification. So gentrification is a process where economic elites, or gentrifiers, are responsible for patterns of disinvestment, reinvestment, and displacement. Moreover, gentrification may be explained by the characters or the characteristics of both consumption and production. Consumption explains the occurrence of gentrification as a result of middle-class taste that have risen in response to demographic change, labor market transformations, and new styles of preference. It prescribes neighborhood change as a market-driven process, leading to the highest and best use of the land. Production attributes gentrification to broad patterns of uneven development and urban restructuring brought about through the local national and international movements of capital. The two explanations connect when economic and behavioral patterns are used to describe gentrification as a conflict between use values, residents seeking to preserve the community because of the meaning that their lives gain, as Dr. Daniels was saying, through culture, right? And through their daily periodic reactions. You know, that's what we mean when we say use values. And exchange values, capitalistic entrepreneurs concerned for increasing the economic value of property. Hence, gentrification is, in fact, largely a function of government policy that has stimulated private financial investment in response to sustained disinvestment. In other words, both neighborhood segregation and neighborhood disinvestment set the stage for gentrification we experience today. At the same time, federal housing policy continued to be carried out as an assault on the poor. Hence, in 1992, under the Clinton administration, HUD reinvented itself and established Hope 6. Right? Hope 6. Hope 6 was meant to raise the worst public housing complexes and replace them with mixed income units, a third public housing, a third affordable housing, a third market rate. By the time the program ended, approximately 15 years later, over 96,200 to be exact, units of public housing nationwide were raised. And out of the 107,800 units that were built, only 56,800 were redeveloped as public housing. That amounts to a loss of 39,400 units, or 40% of the public housing stock. Perhaps, as in Baltimore, if I can use that as an example, where Lafayette Courts became Pleasant View Gardens, Hope 6 best symbolizes the turning point, where rather than segregating from us, gentrification processes via public-private partnerships became more visible as reinvestment and living in our communities and displacing the most vulnerable among us first. Over time, gentrification developed in three waves. One, or the first, public policies implemented at the neighborhood scale under the premise to combat urban decay, aimed at creating a good climate for real estate business. This was around the late 70s, early 1980s. Second, gentrification became part of a larger economic development strategy, which involved global financial capital and was characterized by the formation of public-private partnerships and entrepreneurial administrations that spatially affected inner-city neighborhoods. This is where we were in the 1980s, going into the early 90s. This is particularly the case when it comes to tourist gentrification, such as in New Orleans, where tourism is the major economic driver. Third, since the recession of the early 1990s, gentrification has restructured with a myriad of spatial forms, neighborhood restructuring, new building gentrification, commercial areas, and what we now know as climate gentrification, where people are moving into places or Black communities that don't flood, for example, which sets the epic apart from the other two, an increasing formulation of alliances between private developers and local governments. So I'm getting my cue here to wrap it up. But let me end by this. Today's gentrifier is less likely to be a single homeowner and more likely to be a large-scale corporate interest, possibly even Asian, Brazilian, or African, responsible for building numerous units on multiple tracts of land. And according to political scientist Sister Michelle Boyd, what she argues is something that she calls happening in her analysis of the Douglas Grand Boulevard area on Chicago's South Side, of Black gentrifiers coming in and initiating processes of residential and commercial gentrification that she refers to as racial ordering as defense development, where the Black elite aim to protect the neighborhood from the control of white elites, securing development resources and enhancing property values. However, and this is key, in the process, they end up promoting gentrification by marginalizing and demobilizing the neighborhood's economically vulnerable residents most likely to experience gentrification. So with this review or overview, I hope that I have shed some light on our concern for gentrification and its impact on our community. Certainly, I believe it is an issue that requires race and racism to be conceived in relation to global and local conditions and the intersection of dominant contemporary interests, the new elites, with older colonial orders, and for how we think about crafting public policies that end gentrification and the continuous harmful displacement that has affected our communities down through the ages. Thank you.
Now, I just didn't, I have a note here that says, if we don't feed the people, we're going to be in revolt. So I mean, and the other side of it is we need people to be succinct too, because we want to stay on schedule. And we are going to feed you, and we have another presentation, which is an overview presentation, and we don't want to then cut into the other section because they'll get shortchanged. So therefore, I have to be the bad cop or the good cop in that regard. So be patient with us. Take a deep breath. Imagine that you're already eating, that you're ingesting them sandwiches over there and that light repast. And we're going to bring on Dr. Nashani Frazier, who is going to give you a visual mapping. And we think all of this is important, by the way, because these are the last presentations per se. The rest of it is conversation, but we did want to set the table in terms of having these kinds of presentations. So, and she started this last year when she was here for the Economic and Marshall Plan Summit that we talked about. Give it up for Dr. Nashani Frazier.
All right. While I get set up, I'm going to give you a second. Give me a second. I'm going to be real quick. It's my job to not just talk about mapping gentrification. It's my job to put you people to work. And my graduate student will tell you, when I mean to put you to work, I mean I will put you to work. So just get yourselves ready. Part of what I'm doing came out of my experience of IBW 21 last year when we were dealing with Black economic development. That's what my historical work was on. As we talked about Black economic development, there was one key issue that came up again and again, and that was the question of how can we talk about Black economic development of a community if the community is not there? That gentrification was ravaging the cities, and so this whole question of how do you develop a particular space was now up in the air. We were initially going to do a digital project that would focus on Black economic development, and it became clear that that project was too big, but it also didn't deal with the emergency circumstances of gentrification. So we got in conversation with Don Rojas, Zach Williams. We put our heads together, and I was partly influenced by my own experience. Cameron Smith is here. She and I got to know each other partly because of her work and partly because of what is happening in Durham. Durham literally changes every day. It becomes unrecognizable. And I'm particularly impacted by the ways in which I seem to disremember the location of things. And as a historian, for me, that was deeply affecting, because then that meant that the erasure was not just the building itself, but my own mind. I hope you understand what I'm saying. And the existence of my people and what we were doing. And I was standing out on a summer night, listening to the street corner church and the underground economy. You know, that's sexy for the pimps and the prostitutes and the barbershop. And I realized I wouldn't hear that sound because of the nature of gentrification and how it was affecting the neighborhood. So I already had begun the process of taking pictures when I was working with Zach Williams and talking about this whole question of gentrification. Out of that became the Gentrification Mapping Project. And I'm just going to sort of start, even though I don't have it up. There are 5 approaches to the Gentrification Mapping Project. First, preservation and dampening the erasure process. One of the things that I have asked historians, I'm a member of a historical association, to do is to take photographs of the community, because as they knock down these buildings, that act of rebranding that Professor Lowe has already referenced, all acts to erase the history of African Americans in the space. In Cincinnati, we have Over the Rhine. They keep referring to it as a German neighborhood, where the Germans haven't been there since the 1910s, which, by the way, the Germans have been pushed out by the people in the city because of World War I. But now they're rebranding it as the old German neighborhood. So for me, the preservation aspect was really important. To that end, we determined that we would conduct preservation in 2 kinds of ways. One, through oral history interviews. It's important to know where our people go and what is happening to them. Part of the deliberate process that we see happening with gentrification is being ignored, and it's being constructed as market forces. And Dr. Lowe was very helpful in setting up the historical policies that's actually driving gentrification. And so, but if you, as a historian, I know all you have to do is listen to the people. And the people have already said that they're being driven out. But we're not capturing that information. So oral history interviews is only one method of preservation. The other thing is through images, photographs, videos, anything that serves to make it clear that you won't erase our presence in a space. That's part of what the project will do. The second part is to document protest action. Now, this is the part of the website that is the activist component. It's intended to list and outline examples of protest action or anti-gentrification activities as a way of helping folks across the nation connect, share, and network. And I think this is particularly important because right now, gentrification as an issue is dealt with as isolated protests in cities in one place or another. There's not that mass movement. We're clearly all, as we are represented here, doing work on gentrification, but now this is the first time we know each other. That's a problem. So the digital map and the digital space will go beyond the room to try to connect on a national level so that we turn this into a movement and by extension, bring more pressure to bear, all right? There are a number of protests that we've seen appear when it comes to gentrification, which we would like to turn into a training manual. To give you an example of the kind of protests that we have or have seen, there's obviously the demonstrations. This is the part where you would like to show me my if you can get it up.
Is it just the website you're showing right now?
Yes. 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 All right, as he's pulling that up, I'll show you an example of what I mean. I was in Brooklyn, and as I was walking in Brooklyn, I ran smack dab into a protest over gentrification. I started videotaping. They were passing out flyers referring to gentrification as ethnic cleansing. So I think it's really, again, important to capture the voices of people and the ways in which they engage in protest. I also wanted to highlight the ways in which politicians are also responding to gentrification. Dr. Lowe referenced the congressional bill to name so that it wouldn't be rebranded, South Harlem, to keep the name Harlem. I'm going to reference, however, there are other examples. In Portland, Maine, they have a Right to Return project. And the Right to Return project is a program set up by the city to create affordable housing. And for those who have been pushed out of particular neighborhoods, they fill out the application process, and then they help facilitate movement back into their former neighborhoods. So there are cities that are fully aware of this issue. Cameron can tell you about Durham, who has been under the limelight because of this problem of gentrification. And Cameron, you have to correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that they just passed a new bond. And specifically, that bond is designed to increase income to produce affordable housing. And that's because all the rich people have come to Durham, where now the average home is anywhere $400,000. The last thing I heard was there was $1 million house in the middle of down. I mean, this is Durham. I just want y'all to conceive this, $1 million. All right. So now all you rich people who have been coming in here through gentrification can now pony up your money to create a space that allows for affordable housing. So the city council just passed that. Thank you. So now I'm up and I can pull right here. Okay, because I know we're on the clock, so I'm moving kind of quickly as possible. Okay. Yeah. All right. So you'll notice with the project up that we have a number of categories. The first one is mapping gentrification. The second one is tracking gentrification. I'll get into that in a minute. Anti-gentrification projects, tools of gentrification. Just very quickly, you'll notice that underneath what we've done is create headings that reflect what we've noticed in our research on gentrification, and there seems to be categories of responses. Protest is one, land trusts, CDCs tend to do land trusts. You get people like TI, who are individuals who are buying up land and property and then creating affordable housing. And actually, Hustle was one of those people, by the way. There's some rumor about his whole dying because the property he was getting was really prime property, all right? And he was trying to do it for affordable housing. So there's a kind of backstory there. Legal challenges, and I think we have a brother here who did bring a lawsuit, and he'll be able to speak to how do you launch a legal challenge, and we'll have that on the website so people have ammunition, all right? Churches are actually all really front and center now, and then education. I'll tell you there are multiple forms of education, but what I'm going to highlight is the picture to your right, Not for Sale. They actually created a play in Humboldt Park all about not selling your property. And I'm going to tell you that's powerful, because what it does is use the art and culture to really to educate the average folks, right? So it's not talking heads and all that kind of stuff. The play becomes the tool by which you train people how to protect themselves and how to protect their homes. It was a beautiful play. So when we say education, I don't mean just the symposiums. I'm a historian, so I know we like to talk, all right? But I'm not talking about just the talking, right? There are all kinds of ways we can educate our people and be creative about it. And that Not for Sale is one of them. The other thing that we are trying to do is to document the tools of gentrification, and this is particularly key. I'm not going to focus on all of them, However, I'm going to focus on 2, landmark targeting. You might have noticed that the ways in which gentrification happens is that they go at churches and other Black landmarks. In the middle, you see Cameron will know this, Leo's Seafood. Once they came for Leo's, that was it. In Atlanta, Friendship Baptist Church. Once they came for the church, that was it. So one of the strategies that we can talk about is how to create national landmarks out of Black sites. We need to recognize ourselves and our contribution, but also federalizing space marks the space as Black. And this is important because when you go to Chicago and Humboldt Park, they have these huge metal flags. So you know you have entered Puerto Rican territory. Ain't no getting around it, and ain't no knocking it down. So we need to think about how do we hold our space, not just in terms of economic tools like purchasing a home, but marking the space, and particularly as a historian, through historicizing the space as Black. And I think that, again, this is why you have to deal with the erasure part, the attempt to remove us from the history. All right, sound and space. Dr. Daniels has already referenced this. Here it is. You get some drumming. All of a sudden, the white woman with the dog doesn't like the drumming. Here come the police. This is really important. All right? Sound is a tool of power and control in ways that you would be surprised. All right? And the police, as enforcers and tools of the city, act to facilitate the political economy that Dr. Lowe talked about, right? So you have the policies in place, but you also have the police acting on the behalf of the city to institute those policies, all right? Space. I always tell people, you know gentrification by pastel houses. It seems that they like white people like pastel houses. I don't know. New sidewalks, new trees, new signage, and this stuff appears actually 3-4 years before you see the new houses, right? So you really don't need to see the new house to know that gentrification is coming. So there are ways in which the space is marked by the city that lets you know that the city is preparing to come in. By the way, the 20-year plan for cities is really important. People don't realize that they are going into outlining a plan where they're going to change the space. And I'll tell you who is looking at the 20-year plan: the bankers and investors. Because then they know that the city is going to give all kinds of tax breaks, so they use that as a basis to come in and break into those areas. So the 20-year plan is your key to understanding how the space is about to change, all right? Now tracking, and I'll end right there because I know y'all hungry and I gotta make it quick, all right? Tracking, one of the things that was really important was, for me, documenting the gentrification as a national phenomenon. Every time I talked to somebody, it was clear we were all dealing with gentrification, but we didn't know the scale, we didn't know how impactful it was. If you see your NCRC packets in front of you, Shifting Neighborhoods, they focus on 4 neighborhoods to document specific examples of gentrification, but they have a national map that looks at the intensity of gentrification. What I wanted to do was create a map that would track the status of gentrification from low to high, track it in particular cities, and then provide a card that would give you information about who was responsible for gentrification in that city, who is an activist who's responding. So people in Durham need to know Cameron is already out there slinging. So if they need help, they know exactly who they can go to. So those individual cards act as not just informational tools, but a basis by which you can then act. So the mapping, hold on one second. The mapping is in 2 forms. One as a giant map, all right? Now, we started this project officially in October. This is not the sexy map we intend to have. Right now, this is the prototype functional map. We actually had 250 articles. That was our methodology that we used to get the information about people, places involved in gentrification, either as actors or challengers, all right? And the articles are particularly important because, again, it gives voice to gentrification. My student over there, Stephen Richardson, created an Excel sheet, which of course I can't show you, unfortunately. All right, but the Excel sheet documented all these categories and pieces of information that then got translated into the map. Now, the reason this is important is, I want you to look in that corner. I'm sorry, it's very difficult, but it's the community input form. What we intend to do is create a Google form that matches to the information that we have in those cards. People in the community can put their information in that Google form, and then whoever is running the website can view it, put it in the Excel sheet, and it automatically goes into the map. So what we're talking about is a living, breathing instrument. This is meant not just to be a prototype, this is meant to be operational like right now, 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 now. Gentrification is now, the map needs to operate as now. So as we are working together, my student will be going around to all the different groups. I'll be going and dealing with some of the groups, taking notes. Here is where y'all about to do your work. You're gonna take notes. I need those notes in order to input that information into the map. I need those notes in order to create the training manual that's going to be the basis for which other activists can get ideas on how to respond to gentrification. So what you say, and I'm hoping this is all okay. I really don't care if it's okay. You're going to do it anyway. What you say is going to go into this map because it's important for really creating a protest movement. And then one final thing that I want to point out, and then we'll wrap it up. And that's a resource in terms of reports. Right now, what we're dealing with are reports that have come in that look at national and or city issues related to gentrification. We will be expanding that as a resource base. And I think it's important to understand sort of what the outcome we want to have. One, that this is a deliberate process. We want to document how this is a deliberate process. Two, we want to create a tool for activism, right? So the community inputs, we utilize it, activists pick it up, they take the ideas, and then they go to their city, they work with other community groups to deal with the issue of gentrification. And then more importantly, we want to cut on the lights. The nature of gentrification is that it has consistently operated in the dark. The kinds of things that Dr. Lowe talked about these Chinese corporations coming in, what they do is set up LLCs in Nevada or some other place, so you can't even track who it is who owns the property. And just so you know, they put LLCs on each property. So they hide it for each property, and you can't tell that it's actually one entity that owns all of the property. Most people don't understand that process. We need to take off the curtain and demonstrate that. So we really want to use this to unveil not just the deliberate process, but the ways in which they are doing this to Black people so they can stop, excuse my friends, talking that bullshit about market forces. Okay, it's not market forces. As Dr. Lowe has historicized, this is way back and right up to the moment. And so we need to make it clear that we see you, we watching you, and we responding to you. So on that end, the gentrification project, I'll be going around with it. My student is gonna be going around with it. You can look at it, put in more details, make any suggestions. This is a working document. This is why y'all being put to work now. It is operational. We intend for it to be used right now. So y'all got to help me right now. That's it. Y'all eat and eat. Okay.
Okay, another round of applause. I mean, that is a tool, right? That's what we're looking for. So already when we start talking about the resource center, and she did it quickly and necessarily, but the following conversation will feed into that as well. But already there is a potential tool that can be used in terms of moving forward.